Hello, and welcome to the Art of Drama Editing. Storytelling and sharing the human experience are at the core of what we do as editors, and nowhere are these elements more present than the realm of drama editing. In this hands-on training course, you'll have a chance to edit a feature-length film from a full set of production dailies, assembling, crafting, and fine-tuning your work as you mold the characters on the screen and build the story on your timeline. You'll begin by downloading all the footage, music, and sound effects as we introduce you to the world of this film, dive deep into story structure, and prepare your timeline for editing. You'll start out slow, rough cutting the first scene, and then move on to playing with time and space as you experiment with dramatic montages, flashbacks and dream sequences, and cross-cutting between scenes. Next, you'll learn how to edit creatively and build rich layers of immersive Foley sound. You'll retime actor performances using visual effects, incorporate techniques like jump cutting, stylizing your footage, and you'll experiment with building new moments using hidden gems in the dailies that both solve story problems and give you a chance to explore what's possible with a little imagination. As we begin assembling the entire feature on the timeline, we'll be going even further into topics like pacing and crafting effective transitions to connect all the pieces together. And finally, you'll learn how to polish your cut as you mix the audio and color correct and grade the footage, preparing the film to be shared with an audience. All right, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Drama editing is a versatile skill that will translate well into many types of projects. Let's start at the beginning and take a look at a common definition for the drama film genre. Dramas are realistic stories about people, their inner struggles, and their outward transformation. They often deal with socially relevant themes, like injustice, inequality, and corruption, just to name a few. They show us humans at their best, their worst, and everything in between. Many dramas have become a force for good by successfully drawing attention to issues, helping to motivate change, and encourage acceptance. For those reasons, editing drama can be particularly rewarding. Drama is probably the most prolific genre of television and film. It has spawned numerous subgenres like crime, period, historical, and romantic. In fact, dramatic storylines are present in all sorts of movies. Just like action films often feature character-driven plots, and comedies deal with social issues, drama films can employ comedic and action elements. Consider Black Panther.
And what are these?
The real question is, what are those? Why do you have your toes out in my lap?
But you don't like my royal sandals.
Black Panther features comedy, action, fantasy, but most importantly explores complex dramatic themes like leadership, prejudice, tradition, and change. We need a broader definition of drama. Try to think about drama not as a genre, but as an element found in all movies. Drama editing focuses on people, helping the audience to connect with our characters, understand how they're affected by the world around them, and see how their actions change it for better or worse. To accomplish this, there are many things we need to teach our audience about our characters. We need to teach them about the world that they live in, help them to understand their past, and learn about their hopes and ambitions. We need to see the challenges they face, their struggles to overcome them, and the differences they make in the lives of others. In this course, we'll cover everything you need to edit drama, from crafting small, intimate moments to the overarching structure and pace of your story. And because there's a human story at the heart of every movie, these skills will help you no matter what genre you work in. Coming up in the next lesson, we'll cover some filmmaking essentials, fundamentals that we're going to reference throughout the course. All right, we'll see you in a bit. As an editor, you might not have had the chance to spend any time on a film production. So, in this lesson, we're going to talk about some filmmaking essentials and how they relate to your work in the editing room. One of the most important things to understand is how a scene is covered. You want to be able to look at a bin of footage and quickly understand how that scene could come together and whether or not you feel like anything's missing. That way, you can work with the production team to make sure that the coverage is picked up in subsequent shooting days. Or, if you aren't able to get reshoots, you'll be able to start thinking of creative solutions to solve the upcoming challenges you'll be facing. So, what exactly is coverage? Coverage is simply a collection of all the footage filmed during production to portray the various scenes in a film. This includes the shots and angles the director planned to satisfy the needs of the script, in addition to extra shots and angles to account for potential editorial challenges that might arise. Let's look at 3 different levels of coverage complexity, starting with level 1, classic coverage. This represents the bare minimum amount of coverage that you're going to need to effectively edit a dramatic scene. In the simplest terms, this would include a very basic wide shot and 2 reverse shots. So let's take a look at this scene from the CW show The Flash. In this scene, Cisco is packing up his gear to go on a trip, and he needs to have a conversation with Nash before he leaves. The important story beat here is that Cisco has changed his mind about Nash filling in for him on the team, and we see that represented in both the dialogue and the coverage of the scene. This is a very simple setup, as we have just 3 main shots to track. First, we have this shot of the entire room, our wide shot. Next, we have this angle on Cisco, which Nash eventually steps into so that we can get some of his shoulder. And finally, we have this angle on Nash, which we know will also contain Cisco's shoulder, since we saw this earlier shot in the scene while Cisco was packing up his bag. This basic coverage is shot reverse shot, and it's one of the most common things you'll see as an editor. Now, this scene would no longer work if we took away one of these. For example, if we remove this shot of Cisco. Although this shot began with Cisco facing the camera, eventually Cisco turns around to face towards Nash, and there would be no coverage of this character for the rest of the scene. This is bad because we would completely lose track of Cisco's character, and the importance of his lines would be dramatically diminished. One of the key things that the original scene gets right with its coverage is the way that it respects the 180-degree line. You may have heard this referred to as the stage line, or casually mentioned when discussing characters' eye lines. The 180-degree rule is an important rule to understand as an editor. It means that there's an invisible line between each character in a scene, and the cameras should always remain on one side of that line. Let's demonstrate how this works using this same example from The Flash. First, we have this wide shot, which sets up the scene. We can see that Cisco is standing here, and Nash will enter here. Now let's draw the 180-degree line between them. The rest of the camera angles on each character in this scene need to be on the corresponding side of the line that we see in the wide shot. This will maintain the same screen direction of the characters on camera. For instance, when we cut from the wide shot into the close-up of Cisco, which then focuses back to Nash, we can see that the camera is still on the correct side of that line. This way, Nash still appears on the right side of the frame, and Cisco still appears on the left. Additionally, the coverage of Cisco is also on the same side of this line. The camera point towards Cisco would be somewhere around here. This means that Cisco is still on the left side of the frame, while Nash is still on the right side of the frame. This back and forth is maintained throughout the scene until we get to this moment here, where it looks like the camera is actually in a different position. It's possible that the editor of this episode chose to cut to the alternate angle of Nash at this moment for dramatic clarity, since Cisco has just apologized and it's changed the dynamic of their normally contentious relationship. But it's important to note that even though the camera position changed, this shot still respected the 180-degree rule. Let's hop back into our overhead and take a look at where this camera may have been placed. You can see here that this camera angle is still on the same side of the line as the wide shot, the coverage of Nash, and the coverage of Cisco. Okay, so now we've seen how the 180-degree rule helps your audience understand the spatial relationship between the characters on the screen, and how following it makes it clear to the audience where they should be looking. But sometimes the rules can be bent or broken. Take a look at the end of this scene, where Nash and Sisko approach each other.
So while I'm gone, do your best not to break anything, will you, Nashville?
Break everything while you're gone. Got it.
It's like you're literally not listening to what I'm saying.
What's that?
Let's see that play out down here while we also watch the overhead diagram. What's happened here is that Sisko stayed to the right of Nash, but Nash moved over. In this coverage of Nash, he has switched sides in the shot, and he now appears to be on the left side instead of where he was traditionally standing on the right. Though technically incorrect, this type of movement or edit doesn't always mean the audience is going to be lost. The camera angles have smartly been kept wide enough so that we always see Nash and Sisko's shoulders in each shot, meaning that we're never wondering where somebody's standing or in what direction they should be looking. Now, there's one more interesting filmmaking technique being employed in this scene, and it's valuable to see it in action before you run into it while sifting through your own dailies. Oftentimes, when choreographing the placement of characters in a scene, actors will do what's called taking over a mark. Taking over a mark is when two actors switch positions and effectively reuse each other's marks as their new stopping point. It's important for actors to hit these crucial marks so that the camera operator and the focus puller can make sure that they're properly framed up and in focus, and so the lighting crew can ensure that they've stepped into the correct spot for the lighting that's been set up for them. Let's see how taking over a mark plays in this scenario. You can see that Sisko walks past Nash and takes several steps. But not only does Sisko keep walking, Nash also walks forward. This may seem a little odd at first. Why would Nash walk forward? The reason is that the actor needs to make it several more steps to land on the mark that the actor playing Sisko was standing on the whole time. This way, Nash will be properly lit, framed up, and in focus when he turns around. Additionally, Sisko has now taken over Nash's mark in the doorway. Though we don't have access to the raw footage here, with a little bit of deep thinking, we can imagine what the coverage might have looked like in this case, specifically on one shot in particular. Let's rewind for a moment and take a look at the shot that we pointed out earlier in the scene, this shot of Nash. We initially pointed out that it was advantageous for the editor to have access to another camera angle to use for Nash when he realizes that Sisko has apologized. Cutting to this new angle adds a little bit more dramatic weight to this moment. But it's also a smart consolidation of camera work. Let's hop back into our diagram. This shot acts as a new angle of Nash while he's standing and talking to Sisko. But after Nash would have walked past the camera's frame, Sisko would just as soon enter the same frame, taking over Nash's mark. And this shot would become the final push in on Sisko that we need to wrap up the scene. As an editor or assistant editor, you might easily mistake this coverage for having a lot of unnecessary dead space, as Nash would leave the frame for several lines of dialogue before Sisko re-enters. So it's important to understand how scenes are shot and constructed, so that while you're looking through dailies, you don't miss an important moment later in a shot that was intended to be used in the cut. Now that we've seen how basic coverage works on a simple scene, let's take a look at a scene with a little bit more complexity to it by including some extra coverage.
I didn't wake up till 5. My body's so off, I feel like it's time for breakfast.
I bet you're beautiful any time of the day. In fact, I'd say you're much prettier than Lisa Mays. I like the dark makeup on your eyes. I also like the way you smell.
So where are you from now?
This scene, from the film Nightcrawler, has a lot of coverage for the editor to work with. Right off the bat, we can see that there's several shots of the restaurant interior before cutting to the main action, along with an insert shot of Nina's drink before the scene really gets started. These types of shots are known as insert shots and cutaways. These types of shots are useful for the editor to add flavor to the world of the film. In this case, the character's meeting begins with banal conversation, and so it makes sense to show bits and pieces of the restaurant, as that might be the general feeling of someone attending the dinner at this time, just kind of looking around. Second, insert shots and cutaways can artificially adjust the pace of the scene. In this example, the editor was able to speed up the start of the scene by cutting to various shots before the dialogue even got started, rather than just holding on a single wide shot for an extended period of time. And finally, insert shots or cutaways are a great way to help the editor decide how much focus should be placed on a given moment in the scene. The beginning of the scene doesn't feature any dialogue as the characters sit in silence. The editor was able to use the cutaway shots to focus away from that silence and not linger on it. Now, let's take a look at an overhead diagram of this scene. Here, we can see that so far, the wide shot, the shot of Nina's drink, and both the shots of Nina and Lou are all correctly placed on one side of the 180-degree line. To reiterate the importance of this, it means that at any given point in this scene, we will always discover that Nina is on the left side of the frame, looking towards the right, and that Lou is on the right side of the frame, looking towards the left. Unlike the previous example, this scene also features additional angles for the editor to work with. However, these angles are not major changes, rather, they're more intimate close-ups of the same perspective. Once the scene gets a little further along, the editor chooses to cut to this lower angled wide shot. This wide shot differs from the previous wide shot that we saw at the start of the scene by being much closer to the actors and from a lower perspective, although both shots are wide enough to feature both actors in the same shot.
I've watched all the videos from when you were a reporter. I'm sure you look at those, of course.
No, God, no. Not without a drink in my hand.
I watch my work all the time.
Yeah, do you want to become a reporter?
No,
Most you guys want airtime.
not me. I want to be the guy that owns the station, that owns the camera. The business is going well, but in order to grow to the next level, I need to stay one step ahead of my competition and take risks. I also need financial support to implement expansion.
At this point in the scene, we can tell that Lou might be up to something, but we aren't sure what it is yet. This version of the wide shot is closer to the action, and at this stage, the audience should feel like they're getting sucked into the story. Having two options of wide shots gives the editor the choice of when to draw the audience closer to the moment. As we continue through the scene, we can see that the editor is ping-ponging between medium shots of Nina, medium shots of Lou, and the slightly closer wide shot. However, let's take a look at how the editor chose to play this moment.
Most Americans watch local news to stay informed. I also learned that the average half hour of Los Angeles television news packs all of its local government coverage, including law enforcement, budget, transportation, education, and immigration, into 22 seconds. Local crime stories, however, not only usually led the news, but filled 14 times the broadcast, averaging 5 minutes and 7 seconds. KWLA relies heavily on such stories. With Los Angeles crime rates going down, I think that makes items like mine particularly valuable, like rare animals. I can only imagine that your needs will increase during next month's rating sweeps period.
Woo! Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate what you do.
There are certain good things about being alone. You have time to do the things you want to do, like study and plan, but you can't have dinners like this or be physical with a person, outside of flirtationship.
Where are you going with this?
This moment plays out in a very similar way to how the rest of the scene has already been played, with one exception. After the editor chooses to use the wide shot, where Nina effectively ignores Lou, the next cut is into a much tighter close-up of Lou than we've seen previously. It's in this moment that Lou begins to explain his want in the scene, and Nina begins to understand why she's having dinner with him in the first place. We can assume that this extreme close-up shot was filmed from the start of the dialogue scene all the way to the end, so that it could later be decided in editing how the scene should be built. This is why we look at this scene as complexity level 2. The addition of these tighter, more intimate close-ups allows the editor to choose when to use them throughout the scene. In this case, the editor has wisely withheld those extreme close-ups until the moment called for it. As editors, we need to know all the important moments within a given scene so that we can know exactly when to use these types of shots. And it's important to understand the coverage that you might receive from the production team so that you can better think about organizing that coverage in your timeline or bins. These are the basic building blocks of a scene. Now, we're going to take a look at one more level of complexity, more dynamic or motion-filled coverage. With the invention of tools like the Steadicam, 3-axis gimbals, and more filmmakers using smaller, lighter weight cameras, cranes, and handheld rigs, complex camera movement has become a core component of the language of filmmaking. Let's take a look at a scene with a lot of camera movement to see how the editor works with the footage to construct an easy-to-understand scene. In this scene, from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry enters the room through a door and approaches Hedwig, his pet owl. His eye line, and the 180-degree line, is presently between Harry and the owl. However, when he hears a voice from off-camera, he turns, and the 180-degree line shifts. The editor is responsible for keeping the continuity and the flow of this motion clear for the audience. Let's take a look at how that all plays out in an overhead diagram. First, Harry walks in, and we have a camera positioned here. In this instance, Harry is on the left side of the screen, looking towards the right at the owl. But once Harry hears a voice in the distance, he turns, and the editor chooses to cut to this camera angle. Harry is now on the right side of the screen, looking towards the left. This is an important edit for two reasons. The first is that the editor was fortunate enough to have the coverage in this scene to make this cut and not have to stay on the first shot, which would have resulted in a profile angle of Harry instead of a straight-on angle. And second, because this edit also shifts the 180-degree line simply by cutting, the editor is teaching the audience that Harry is now always going to look to the left while speaking to the minister. The next cut is equally as important, as we now see the reverse angle of this moment, with Harry on the right side of the frame while looking over his shoulder, and the minister on the left side of the frame looking towards the right.
Earlier this evening, your uncle's sister was located a little south of Sheffield, Sir Chimney Stack. The Accidental Magic Reversal Department was dispatched immediately. She has been properly punctured and her memory modified. She will have no recollection of the incident whatsoever. So that's that. And no harm done.
As we saw in both previous examples, the filmmakers were careful to put their cameras in appropriate positions so that any given moment when cutting to either Harry or the minister, they would appear to be looking at each other, with Harry on the right looking to the left, and the minister on the left looking to the right. Take a look at this sequence in the overhead diagram as the scene plays through.
Earlier this evening, your uncle's sister was located a little south of Sheffield, Sir Chimney Stack. The Accidental Magic Reversal Department was dispatched immediately. She has been properly punctured and her memory modified. She will have no recollection of the incident whatsoever. So that's that. And no harm done.
The scene then further adds complexity by introducing a second and third 180-degree line as the servant character steps away from Harry, but is still included in the dialogue of the scene. You can see that we now have three characters in our scene who all need to look at each other. It's clear that the filmmakers chose very specific camera angles to make this moment clear, both in the comedy of the scene and in choosing angles that wouldn't distract from the rhythm and inherent drama. Let's take a look at the setup in an overhead so that you, as an editor, can better be up to speed on what coverage you might receive from a production having to deal with multiple characters in a scene. First, we have the two cameras filming Harry and the minister, with the line between them. We've already established this, and so, as an editor, we know that we can return to these shots at any point without losing or confusing the audience. But now we've also introduced this shot, facing towards the servant. The editor smartly chose to cut to this shot after Harry looked in the direction of the servant, establishing a new eyeline for these two characters. When we return to the shot of Harry, we continue to exist in the standard coverage that we've been seeing thus far. However, there's one important shot to pay attention to here. After the minister jokes with Harry, we hear the servant laughing. Since we've already established the position of this character in the scene, there's no need to focus on Harry, or to have Harry look before we cut to the servant. The audience already knows he's there. However, the servant is primarily motioning towards the minister, and so when we return to a reaction shot of the minister, It's from an entirely new angle seen here. This is the third eye line that's being established in this scene. So we have the eye line from Harry to the minister, and the camera angles associated with that. We have the eye line from Harry to the servant, and the camera angles being used for that. And finally, we have the eye line from the servant to the minister, and the camera angles being used for that. Now that we've seen all the various coverage from our first and second levels of complexity, let's watch the scene one step further and see if we notice anything familiar.
On the other hand, running away like that, given the state of things, was very, very irresponsible.
The state of things, sir?
We have a killer on the loose.
Sirius Black, you mean? But what's he got to do with me?
Nothing, of course. You're safe, and that's what matters. And tomorrow you'll be on your way back to Hogwarts.
In this moment, the actor's blocking has the minister step behind Harry, and Harry turns around in his chair. Although slightly different, it's the same concept as what we saw earlier in The Flash. In that example, Nash took over Cisco's mark and turned around. Thus, the camera angle became Nash's shot. In our Harry Potter example here, the camera remains in roughly the same position. However, the camera that was filming the minister has now become the camera that's filming Harry, and the camera that was filming Harry has now become the camera that's filming the minister. Check out how that might have looked on set with this overhead diagram.
On the other hand, running away like that, given the state of things, was very, very irresponsible.
The state of things, sir?
We have a killer on the loose.
Sirius Black, you mean? But what's he got to do with me?
Nothing, of course. You're safe, and that's what matters. And tomorrow you'll be on your way back to Hogwarts.
As an editor, you'll need to understand these filmmaking techniques, from eye lines to basic coverage, to how a director or cinematographer might decide to move the camera in a scene. Knowing the language of filmmaking will give you a mental shortcut when you start watching the dailies, and this is going to allow you to think about when and where you need to place an edit so that your audience isn't confused about what's happening in any given environment. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to learn how to deconstruct human facial expressions and body language to help us analyze and choose the best takes and actor performances to support the story and drama of each moment. All right, I'll see you in a bit.